So for this video, I actually had quite a lot of fun because it gives me an opportunity to show how Darth, even though I think most people would get the impression that he likes to pride himself as being a good Bible student, we're going to see where he's actually, in this case, he's pretty sloppy, actually. Very sloppy. But I'm going to show that. I'm going to show how he is very sloppy. But before I get to that, I want to get to a few preliminaries. Let me call it that. These are just odds and ends that I'd like to point out that will give us a little bit of background, and I think it'll help a little bit. So here are a few clips that I chose, which will give us a little more insight as to Darth's biblical skills or academic skills. Here they are. The first one is talking about his favorite Bible version. Okay, he had answered this on at least a couple occasions, and so here's that clip.
International version. Which one would you like?
Of course, that's a piece of garbage. Okay?
Which one would you like? Pick it.
Okay, the New American Standard. Okay, the new message down to the word that God intended.
Do you speak either ancient Hebrew or ancient Greek?
No.
Aramaic?
No.
So you've never read it in the original autograph. You just read it in.
No,
what's your preferred version? KJV, NIV?
New American Standard.
Okay, so you just look at the Bible and say.
Okay, so for the sake of this video, I'm going to be using his preferred or favorite version, which is, according to himself, he said it's the NASB. So that's the one I'm going to use. Now, here's another couple clips. He's discussing his level of academic achievement. Let's put it that way. Here are those clips.
I'm not a philosophy grad student. I've never even gotten a BA in philosophy. Okay, whatever I know about philosophy, I've learned from reading on myself. And you're playing the dumb card?
Do you have a degree in Carlos? Do you have a degree in mathematics?
Yeah, I have a PhD in mathematics.
Okay. Now, does everybody hear
what
this?
Degree
This
do
is,
you have?
you know what? Listen, Carlos.
Do you have a degree?
Listen, Carlos. Do I have?
Do you have a degree?
No, I don't.
Okay, so I just thought I'd get that out of the way. He does not have a degree. He admits that he does not. He admits that he doesn't even have a BA in philosophy. And so, not that that is actually a decider or something that would make a conclusion, more or less, but it's just something that I thought I'd include. Now, by the way, even though I rarely go into personal details about myself, I feel that it is appropriate at this moment to point out that, yes, I do have a degree. Okay, now on the next couple clips, we're going to be hearing him talk about the original languages, Hebrew or Greek, and just listen into what he says on this.
Correct. So this particular Hebrew word does not necessarily, according to Bible translators, mean an ordinance or a specific law. Okay, right? So it can refer to God's judgments, okay, or his declarations. So again, what we see here is somebody who's extremely sloppy and doesn't check the original Hebrew. And I'm done. Yes, you are lying, because it does not mean the same thing as a small stone or rock. It means a rock edifice. It's not something that can be picked up or handled. It's a completely different Greek word.
You see, Darth, I'm just searching it now. I'm searching the translation of it from Greek to English. Okay, are you listening?
It doesn't matter. The English is not authoritative. The Greek is.
Okay, so just a little recap. So he admits that he does not speak Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic. He does not speak that. He does not have a degree. Everything that he's learned about philosophy, he's learned on his own. And he feels sometimes, he definitely feels that he has the skill set required to go to either the Hebrew or the Greek and point out to others what the Hebrew or the Greek says. So, let me explain my thought on that. You know, when you look at the whole picture, based on those 4 or 5 clips, what's fair for the goose is fair for the gander. I can do the same thing. Okay, now when I was basically trying to get my ideas together, I came up with 2 different approaches, or 2 ways to show how Darth is completely wrong on what he's trying to say. Okay, now one of the ways I can show that he's wrong is by going to the Hebrew and looking at the word that is used to describe the closing of the womb. There is a particular word in the Hebrew that is used, and we're going to take a look at that word, and we're going to look to see when is the first time in the Bible or in the Hebrew text that that word is actually used. Because if, for example, Darth, if what he is saying is true, then one should be able to, or probably would be able to, find either that idea, maybe not specifically the word, but at least find the idea of the wombs being closed, and this would be something that would happen before the flood. Okay, now the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at what the Bible has to say, or what the Hebrew has to say in the Old Testament, specifically starting at the time of the flood and looking backwards. We're going to take a look to see what happened during the generations that led up to the flood. In other words, actually, we're going to start from Adam, and we're going to work forward to the time of the flood. And if what Darth is claiming, if that were true, then I think it would be something that we should be able to see in the Bible somewhere between Adam and Noah. We should be able to see something about the wombs being closed. So that's the second idea. But before I get to either of those 2 ideas, I want to show you the clip where Darth was having that particular dialogue and where he was trying to force his idea on the other person. Completely unbiblical. There's no grounds for it anywhere in the NASB as well as the other translations. It's not to be found. But here is that dialogue, or part of that dialogue.
People are innocent simply because of their genetic association with a certain group of people.
Okay, so if there were no children present, would it be genocide?
And, if you're just engaging in a conflict with, armed combatants, we have, I think, a different name for that.
Okay. If there were no children present, would it be a genocide if God wiped out a certain population group?
Yeah, not by my definition. I think my definition was clear on that, right? If it doesn't meet my definition, then it doesn't meet my definition. So
I'm still not understanding you. So if there are no children,
it's not genocide. I mean, that's kind of what I've committed to, right? By using that definition.
Okay, so was the worldwide flood in the biblical narrative genocide in your view?
That's not even one that I think of very often. But yeah, I think it kind of was. But that's not one that bothers me.
Okay. Were there children present?
I just have to imagine there were.
Why?
Well, because that's how the human creature works. They're constantly having children.
Okay. So in the Bible, does the Bible teach that he opens and closes the womb?
I think it does teach that, yeah.
Okay. Could God have closed the womb of the human population on Earth for several decades prior to the flood?
Well, using the construct of the Bible,
within the biblical worldview. Okay. So then there were not children necessarily there. There could have been, but not necessarily.
Sure, but it would seem to me, there wouldn't have been any reason to have a flood if you just shut down the wombs and there's no children.
No, what was the reason for the flood? What was the reason stipulated for the flood in the Bible?
Some kind of
Okay, so now what we're going to do, first of all, we're going to look at that particular word that speaks about closing of the womb. And we're going to take a look to see when that first occurs in the Hebrew text. Now, here is that word. So this particular word in Strong's, it's numbered H6113, and it is pronounced Atzera. And if we take a look at the definition, it goes along the lines of to restrain or to close or to shut. It sometimes is related to arresting or restraining someone. That's basically the idea. Or to close up. So the question would be, or a question, when was that word first used in the Old Testament? Was it used at the time of the flood or in generations leading up to the flood? The answer is no, it wasn't. The truth is that that word does not even come along until chapter 16 of Genesis. All right, so basically what that means is that word, if you look at the timeline and you calculate, I'm just giving an approximate figure, but it's a little shy of 400 years from the time of the flood until the time that word actually occurs. It does not occur at the time of the flood, and it does not occur anywhere in the text prior to the flood. Okay, now just to point out, there is a word in Genesis 11, which is talking about where Sarah was barren. It's the word barren in Hebrew, or in English, I should say, and in Hebrew, it's pronounced akar. That word is talking about that she was not able to conceive. It's not talking about actually the closing of the womb. And it's also important to point out that that particular word came up in Genesis chapter 11, not prior to that. It wasn't mentioned in the flood. It wasn't mentioned anywhere in the Hebrew text prior to the flood. So either of the two words, nothing is read about that or seen prior to the flood. Okay, now going into the second idea, what I want to show is that if number two, and this is really the thing that I would say is the strongest point against Darth. It's so strong that in order for Darth to be correct, he has to ignore an entire chapter in Genesis. He has to completely ignore that chapter. And that chapter is Genesis chapter 5. Because if you go to Genesis chapter 5, you can actually see the lineage between the time of Adam and his first generation and leading all the way up through until Noah. That is all laid out. It shows the number of generations, and it also shows the number of years. It's a little difficult for me to show this in a video, so what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to copy and paste that particular information into the description area of this video so that anyone can read it. But basically how it goes is that if you count starting with Adam, if you go starting with the first generation after Adam, and you count forward from Adam to the year of the flood, you're going to end up with 9 generations and also 1,526 years from the year of the flood to the year Adam had his first generation of children. Now, when you look at this timeline, you're going to be able to see the children just exactly how in the sequence or the order that they were born from generation to generation. That is showing in Genesis 5. And also, it's important to note that there are certain words you can look for, and one of those words is Strong's H120, which is pronounced Adam. All right, that word, it is translated more than one way, but it is used 408 times to mean a man or men. It's also used of the word Adam. It's referring to Adam, himself. But that particular word, what's interesting is that when you look at the verses that are talking about, and this is still in Genesis, where it says that God made man in his image after his likeness, that's the word that you see. It's talking about a literal man. So if you look at that particular word, that word shows up multiple times in the Genesis account. As a matter of fact, it is the same word that is used in Genesis chapter 6, verse 7, where God is actually talking to Noah, and he says that he's going to wipe out mankind. That's the same word, mankind. That is the exact same word that occurs where God is talking about, we will make man in our image, after our likeness. It says, so he wiped out every living thing that was upon the face of the land from mankind. And that word is H120. It's the same word that's used in Genesis earlier when it was speaking about God creating man in his own image. So the reason why that is so important is because it shows after the fact that there were still humans at the time of the flood. It's not talking about wiping out the Nephilim, even though some of the humans were, according to the Bible, they were part Nephilim. But in that particular verse, Genesis 7:23, it's not referring to the Nephilim. It's referring to mankind, or man, the same word that's used earlier. Now, there were other words that you can also take a look at that further reinforce this idea that humans or humanity or men were actually still alive. They were still reproducing all the way through from the time of Adam, all the way through to the generations that led up to the flood. In fact, if you go back to chapter 5, whenever you're reading that lineage or that, that sequence of 8 or 9 generations, not only does it said a son was born, but in every generation it said that the father had other sons and daughters. So that further nails it down that those people were reproducing, they were having children, generation after generation. They were not all Nephilim. Some of them were humans, and they were having more than just one kid at a time. They were having other sons and daughters, which were not even mentioned in the actual lineage. So that pretty much shows that Darth and his idea of what he was trying to force onto others pretty much goes into the toilet. Okay, so Darth, if you are listening to this, or if you hear about this video, my suggestion is that you be a lot more careful about what you're trying to say or imply. I would be a lot more careful if I were you, because what you said, it was pretty sloppy, and furthermore, it's not even in the text. You're bringing up something out of thin air. Now, I'm sure you would like it to be in the text, but it's not there. All right, so that pretty much wraps this up. If you're watching, anyone who's watching, please feel free to leave a comment. Thank you.